Do you worry when you talk about the corporate media that you are targeting journalists when you say that?
No. Donald Trump talks about fake news, and that's simply to deflect attention from the fact that he's a pathological liar. My experience one-on-one with media, they work hard. They very rarely am I misquoted. But what I am talking about, Margaret, is that corporate media limits the kind of debate that we have in this country. You tell me, you know more about it than I do. How often do we talk about income and wealth inequality?
We're talking about right now, Senator.
Yeah, but how often? Not everybody is Bernie Sanders on your show. How often do you talk about concentration of ownership? How often do you talk about the fact that we are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care at all, and yet we spend twice as much money? How often do you talk about that if somebody has a baby in Finland, they're getting 9 months off or 10 months off paid family leave?
I will talk to you about paid leave for families any day of the week. They also have like a 56% tax rate in Finland, though. It's a very different system. But
good, but let's talk about it. What do they get for that? They get free health care, right? Free higher education. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
That's the debate I want, and that's the debate we really don't have on the corporate media.
Okay, so there were some great points raised in that. And that's why I'm so glad that Bernie Sanders will go on adversarial media like Face the Nation. They talked about some of the stuff, and it's good. But I do want to focus a bit on the framing. Margaret Brennan there saying, do you think that when you talk about the corporate media, you're targeting journalists? Like the idea being that this is in any way comparable to Donald Trump and his fake news and, oh, those people back there, they're censoring you. No, 1,000 times no, we are not gonna accept this sort of framing. Pointing out that much of media is owned by corporations, and that does very much influence what they cover, but especially the things that they don't cover, is so utterly necessary that we cannot allow for a second the conflation of that with people who are trying to demonize journalists individually or as a group and trying to get them killed. We are 1,000% clear that no political violence in any way is acceptable, but criticism of corporate control of media, corporate control of political parties is not nearly talked about enough. So let's just be very clear about that. What do you think, Rayyvana?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was like a really insidious way to start the interview, just sort of starting off with a bad faith argument. But I like that he shut that down quickly. I'll also say Finland does not have a 58% tax. I was looking at their income tax brackets just now. The highest tax bracket is 31%. Like,
oh, really?
For income tax, yeah. So, and the average tax that the average household would pay in Finland, the percentage is nearly identical to the average tax that the average American would pay. She's talking about the highest potential tax bracket, which would only impact the wealthy, and that's only taxed on the money they're making in excess of a certain amount. And the one I was looking at said $80,000 or 80,000 euros in Finland. So there's that. So it's just sort of wholly dishonest, but he is right. It's not about the journalists themselves. There's a lot of journalists who work for corporate news outlets that do really good investigative work, and they're not presenting lies. It's about what stories get published, and it's about how, especially when it comes to corporate news channels, what stories are pitched, what stories are produced, what stories are presented to the public, the ability to cover those stories based on who their advertisers are and what they're willing to present, that they're they're towing that line, right? We don't want to lose this advertiser, so maybe we don't do this story. It's not about the blatant when it comes to things like MSNBC or CNN. It's not like blatant dishonesty in the reporting. It's just about what you're choosing to report on and what, more importantly, you're choosing not to report on.
100%, yeah. So I'm glad that you fact checked it by that way, because I was perfectly willing to accept that was a true figure, and I was going to criticize her for saying to Bernie Sanders of all people, yeah, but do you know that some of these countries in Europe have higher taxes? Yes, he knows. I think that Bernie Sanders knows that, but okay, they're not even that high. I would be fine if they were, and not to get this personal, but I kind of wish that Bernie had flipped it around her and said, Let's get real, Mrs. Brennan. Are you terrified at this current moment of losing your home? Are you terrified of not being able to pay for your next medical procedure? Do you have dental coverage? Because a lot of people don't. Are you worried about being able to retire with dignity? No, let's be clear. You do not have those fears. And now you are afraid of something. You clearly are afraid of your taxes going up. But isn't it an amazing privileged position to be able to have abstract fears like that? That you are freed up from fears of shelter and food and healthcare and all of those things to worry about abstract stuff like your tax bracket. A lot of people would be so lucky as to have those fears. In the same way that like there's Maslow's like hierarchy of needs, there's a hierarchy of fears, and it's great to have abstract ones to worry about. Like, am I making the most of my potential? Man, some people don't have food. So again, it's just there's so much privilege and comfort that is baked into the questions that they ask. They're so utterly comfortable that they're freed up to have these fears that other people would dream of.
Yeah, and just to that point, I mean, as an example, Doctors Without Borders is an organization that we usually picture, going to impoverished countries and providing health services to people with no or extremely limited income and no access to those services. They also do that in West Virginia, in the United States, and there's like dentist groups that'll come in and give dental care for free, every once in a blue moon to people living within the United States. I mean, these are issues that I'm sure she hasn't ever thought about in her life, but it's a reality for a lot of people here. They're not worried about taxes aside from when is the date I have to file by, and do I have TurboTax still downloaded on my phone, right? Or how much money am I going to get back from my taxes? Like low income people, myself included, are always looking forward to our tax returns. We're not concerned about, how much of our wealth that we've hoarded is being taken away and redistributed for goods and services for lower income people. So it's just such an unrelatable position, but it does it seeps its way into the discourse. Like I always use my parents as an example. I mean, we're a low income household. They're in a low tax bracket, but my mom always votes on taxes. They used to be Republicans for a long time, and they would always talk about, oh, this is gonna increase taxes. But it's like, your taxes are low. Like this is not an issue for you, but it does just continuing with that message does it melts its way into the public discourse, and it persuades people who wouldn't be impacted negatively by a rise in taxes.
100%. Yeah. And by the way, to take it back to the first point, this isn't about Margaret Brennan. I'm not super familiar with everything that Margaret Brennan says on her show, but she doesn't strike me as one of the worst people in media. She's just a regular person in media who happens on average to be wealthy and secure and comfortable. That's just what they are. And by the way, it's not like the only people that can understand or advocate for these things, that can feel a connection to these things, have to be living on the edge. They don't. Bernie Sanders is not worried about dying on the streets in a few months or anything. He's not gonna but he understands it. He tries. I'm not nearly as insecure as I was for most of my life. I spent many, many years desperately worried that one overage charge on my debit card would ruin my month, basically. But you try to see beyond just your concerns, to not accept I understand that the concept of being woke or whatever has been purposefully ruined. But the idea that you try to look beyond your current position and try to understand the experiences of other people, if anything, should be one of the number one things that people in media do. I understand that we don't have, and we're not gonna have, an NBC news anchor or an MSNBC news anchor that makes the minimum wage, or is like a 19-year-old activist. Like they're always gonna choose richer people who've been around for a while, but they can try. They can try to understand. That's what I would request.
For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/The Damage Report. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.